Hey guys, welcome to Journey of Relaxation. Tonight we follow Apollo not through blazing chariot rides or golden lyre concerts, but into something stickier. You're standing in a sun-washed olive grove on the edge of Mount Parnassus, ankle-deep in warm grasses and buzzing with the low, lazy hum of insects. The god of the sun medicine poetry and general showboating has just had an idea, and that's rarely good news for anyone nearby. You watch as Apollo strides into the clearing, robes perfectly pressed golden curls somehow bouncing in slow motion, despite the fact there's no wind. He's decided in his infinite celestial wisdom that the world needs beekeeping. Not bees, those already exist, thanks to Gaia's whole life explosion phase, but the art of taming them, farming honey may be adding a touch of divine flair. His inspiration: a sunbeam caught in a drop of morning dew that tasted like potential. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle against a warm rock as Apollo claps his hands and declares to no one in particular that this new hobby will combine art, order, and a modest amount of danger, which is usually code for someone's going to get stung in the eye. He paces the grove, mumbling about hexagons and the golden ratio. And yes, his very first hive is made from polished laurel wood, because of course it is. Carved with sunburst motifs and lined with strips of celestial amber imported directly from the Isle of the Hesperides because regular beeswax is too pedestrian. The problem: Apollo has no idea what bees actually need. He thinks they'll just show up, sense the divine aura, and organize themselves politely. You try to point out that even mortal beekeepers start with a smoker protective gear and maybe a basic grasp of hive biology. But Apollo just shushes you with a smile and a wave of his absurdly well-manicured hand. Bees, he insists, will recognize beauty. Sure they will. By noon, the first swarm appears, drawn either by the sugary sheen of sunlight or just morbid curiosity. They hover, examine the hive, and then begin to settle. Apollo beams. Literally. His ego swells in sync with the hum. He proclaims himself Apollo Malicios, patron of honey and order. But then something weird happens. The bees start flying in strange patterns. Instead of building combs, they do aerial spirals. One hovers near Apollo's ear and then stings his golden earlobe. He swats at it, offends the swarm, and suddenly the sunny grove is filled with what sounds like an angry kazoo orchestra. Historians still argue whether Apollo invented the bee dance by accident or if bees already did it, and he just took credit. Either way, the choreography is off. These bees are not grateful. They are disoriented and very annoyed. And now they're in his perfect curls. Apollo panics. He tries to sing them calm, switching from lullabies to operatic odes, but the volume just makes things worse. By the time the sun starts dipping toward the hills, the laurel hive is abandoned. Apollo's tunic is full of welts, and you're wondering if this is how the sun god loses his credibility. To insects, they only win a single drop of honey glistening in the center of the hive like a consolation prize. It smells divine, literally. But as you lean closer to sniff a lone bee, dive bombs your nose. Apollo scoffs. It's early days, he says, licking his swollen lip. Trial phase. You don't remind him that the last trial phase he attempted was inventing the pan flute out of reeds and hubris, and that also ended with someone crying into a mountain stream. Still, you stick around, because when a god fails this publicly, things usually get interesting. You wake the next morning to the smell of caramelized sunlight, an aroma that shouldn't exist. But here in Apollo's grove, physics is more of a polite suggestion. The god is already hard at work, sleeves rolled to the elbows, forging hive panels out of well light. He pinches sunbeams between thumb and forefinger, stretches them like molten glass, and shapes them into hexagonal lattices that glimmer in mid-air. It's dazzling, sure, but also deeply impractical. The moment a cloud drifts by, half the structure blurs like an unfinished hologram. Ever the project manager, you suggest sturdier materials. Apollo nods sagely and immediately orders laurel wood, because if his sacred plant can ward off plague and bad poetry, why not bee problems too? Artisans arrive with carts of fragrant branches, and by noon, the grove looks like an over-the-top Pinterest board titled Rustic Mythic Chic. Mainstream fact time, though, Apollo ignores it. Ancient Egyptians used long clay tubes for their apiaries stacked horizontally like terracotta trumpets. They mastered migratory beekeeping along the Nile season's millennia before our sun god's vanity build. You mutter this tidbit, hoping it'll inspire a practical pivot. Apollo smiles, files it under cute mortal trivia, and keeps twirling sun ribbons. The god's blueprint features a mezzanine for area acoustic resonance, a skylight shaped like his own profile, and bafflingly a small amphitheater where bees can enjoy lunchtime poetry. You raise a hand, bees like dark cavities, steady temps, no draft. Apollo waves you off, adding frescoes of himself wrestling a bear for morale. A joke, at least he didn't paint himself wrestling the bears of Wall Street. Divine portfolios are already stinging enough. As the frames fuse to the laurel walls, you spot a fatal omission: there's no landing board. Apollo thinks bees, being creatures of grace, will hover elegantly into hexagonal portals. You picture 100 tired foragers slamming into glowing doorways like drunk astropilots. Historians still argue whether early Greek Melissae, guardian priestesses of the hive, crafted landing ledges from reeds, or simply let bees tough it out. Either way, Apollo's zero-plan design sits firmly on the wrong side of that debate. He adds a front gate carved with a pun in ancient Attic Greek. Roughly translated, "Behold the glory." You groan so hard your spleen vibrates. Light joke number 2. Then comes the grand reveal of the ventilation system. Apollo installs silver lyre strings across the ceiling, so every gust of wind plays a soft chord. Soothing music calms them, he explains. You point out that bees regulate temperature by fanning wings, not by grooving to celestial elevator tunes. Quirky tidbit: Victorian beekeepers once fitted hives with tiny glass windows to observe moral conduct of bees. Apparently, Victorian boredom was a renewable resource. Halfway through the afternoon, someone finally asks about protective equipment. Apollo conjures a helmet of bronze and mirrors, reasoning that the reflective surface will dazzle attackers. You remind him that glinting sunlight might agitate them. He shrugs. We'll go full Medusa chic. Light joke 3: at least nobody's turning to stone, just turning red and puffy. You craft a basic smoker from a hollow gourd, dry leaves, and a smidge of olive oil residue. Apollo calls it barbaric vape culture, but grudgingly allows you to keep it nearby. For extra flair, he sprinkles saffron into the smolder, claiming it elevates the terroir. Meanwhile, you reread dusty scrolls. Aristotle noted that bees are drawn to specific scents, but hate strong smoke. Moderation is key. The god sprinkles half a pouch. Of course, the smoke plume now smells like breakfast in a luxury spa. By sunset, the hive stands, complete. Part Versailles, part disco ball, 100% OSHA violation. A gentle breeze extinguishes one luminous wall, forcing Apollo to reinforce it with melted amber, which drips like butterscotch and hardens mid-air. He claps proudly. You test a panel. It wobbles like a flan in an earthquake. Somewhere Daedalus facepalms. You remind Apollo of one last necessity: orientation. Skilled beekeepers position hive entrances to catch morning sun guiding foragers. Apollo, however, spins the entire structure every hour so all facets taste dawn. Bees, you suspect, will need motion sickness bracelets. Scholars still debate whether ancient Cretans practiced rotational hiving, or whether that theory stems from mistranslated fresco fragments. If it ever happened, it certainly involved more logic than this merry-go-round. Night deepens. Fireflies weave lazy constellations among olive branches, mimicking the blinking fault lines in the light and wood contraption. You sit on a log, arms crossed, watching Apollo add a final flourish. A tiny plaque reading, "Property of Apollon Helios, trespassers will be sung about mockingly." You clear your throat. So, how do you actually attract a swarm? Apollo freezes lyre, half-strung, eyebrow arched. Attract? It dawns on him he hasn't baited the hive, hasn't prepared empty combs, and definitely hasn't scouted for a queen. To him, bees are like paparazzi. Show up looking fabulous and they'll swarm spontaneously. You explain that real beekeepers sometimes use melted wax or lemon balm to lure scouts. He frowns, mutters something about insufficient glamour, and conjures a goblet of ambrosia instead. If a drop of that lands anywhere near the hive, you're pretty sure it'll attract centaurs before bees. The grove grows quiet, except for chirping cicadas. Apollo sits on a stump, chin in hand, staring at his shimmering art installation. It's heartbreakingly beautiful, like a cathedral for creatures smaller than a fingernail, yet as useless for actual beekeeping as a chocolate teapot in a sauna. You consider breaking the silence with practical suggestions, but the god looks fragile. Divine pride is a brittle thing. So you simply say, "It's a start." He nods slowly, and in that moment you see the tiniest crack in his solar confidence. Maybe, just maybe, he understands that golden hubs and godly aesthetics aren't enough. Bees, after all, are democratic anarchists. They respect pheromones, not pedestals. The moon rises, painting the hive in cool silver. For the first time, the thing looks still, no longer pulsing with hubris, but resting, waiting like an empty theater before opening night. Tomorrow, when the scouts arrive, and they will arrive, chaos is guaranteed. But tonight you both sit sharing the hush the crickets and a faint tingle of anticipation. You glance at Apollo. Phase 2, you ask. He smirks. Acquire bees, preferably ones with taste. You snort. Good luck with that. Somewhere deep in the olive grove, a lone bee buzzes. Maybe it's scouting. Maybe it's lost. Or maybe it's the universe giving Apollo one last warning buzz. Learn the basics. Sunshine. By morning the grove smells like hope and singed saffron. You stretch your limbs under a dew-slick olive tree and blink sleepily at the hive, which now glows faintly gold despite the absence of sunlight. Apollo, ever the early riser, is already circling the hive like an anxious wedding planner. His robes wrinkled, his curls slightly frizzed. This, you realize, is the face of a god in denial. Today's mission: introduce bees. Unfortunately, he's brought the wrong kind. They're sunbees, he says, proudly unveiling a gilded jar of what looks like angry glitter. Engineered from solar flares and musical harmony. You stare into the jar. Inside, 6 glowing specks with iridescent wings swarming furiously in tight spirals. They emit a faint musical hum somewhere between harp and headache. You quietly take a step back. Apollo opens the jar. The sunbees streak out in a blinding arc loop-de-loop above the hive, then promptly disappear into the forest at Mach 12. One slams into a tree and explodes into a tiny firework. The others are never seen again. So, maybe not native to this ecosystem, you offer gently. He nods grimly, summoning a scroll from thin air. Plan B. The scroll unfurls dramatically, revealing a courier note from Mount Hymettus, the real deal this time. Certified Attic honeybees, it promises. Hand-raised by dryads. Polite temperament. Mildly judgmental. When they arrive, it's chaos. The transport basket is leaking bees like a badly corked bottle. One dryad sprints away, her hair full of buzzing rage. Apollo steps forward with open arms and a flute solo. The bees, unmoved. They assess the shimmering hive with clinical detachment, then begin circling it in deliberate, judgmental spirals. It's like watching a group of tiny real estate agents discover a designer house with no plumbing. One by one they enter the hive and immediately exit again. You catch the subtle angle of their flight, not rejection exactly, but severe disapproval. Bee Yelp reviews 1 star, would not swarm again. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient beekeepers learned to transfer swarms by placing an existing queen in a cozy new hive, letting pheromones do the talking. Apollo. He didn't arrange a queen. He figured leadership would emerge naturally like applause at a sunset. You try not to scream into your sleeve. So the bees do what bees do when faced with architectural nonsense and a total lack of governance. They riot. Some begin building wild combs in a nearby olive tree. Others spiral around Apollo's head in protest. One lands on your arm, glares at you, then pees. It's unclear whether bees can actually pee, but that's what it feels like. Historians still argue whether early myths about bee gods like Aristaeus were born from actual agrarian skill or just convenient blame for failing harvests. Watching Apollo get pelted with pollen, you start to suspect it's the latter. The god stumbles back, robes askew, lip bleeding from a sting. They hate me. Not hate, you say, just strong opinions. He looks betrayed, like someone whose golden retriever just bit him. I gave them art, song, shelter. And no queen, you remind him, or order, or... He throws up a hand. I am order. The bees disagree. One lands on his nose and administers a papal-level sting. This prompts a full-on tantrum. Apollo storms into the grove, kicking at tufts of grass, muttering curses in dactylic hexameter. Lightning flickers on the horizon, probably dramatic effect, though you briefly consider rain insurance. Eventually he slumps beside you, cradling his flute like a wounded duck. They're just bugs. You arch an eyebrow. Tiny anarchists with a matriarchal superstructure and the power to shape ecosystems. He mulls this over. So, like the Fates, but stickier. Quirky tidbit time: the ancient Greeks believed bees were sacred messengers between worlds. Some myths claim newborns fed honey were destined for prophecy. Others suggest that bees carried the souls of the dead. So when Apollo flinches from a single scout landing gently on his ankle, you whisper might be an ancestor. He does not find this funny. Still, something shifts. Apollo watches the scout fly off, then rubs his temple. They want a queen, he concedes. Or maybe a plan. He sighs, pulls a scroll from his sleeve, and begins scribbling diagrams. Fine. Tomorrow we rework the hive. I'll consider constructive criticism. You mean from me or the bees? Both. But yours stings less, you snort. Light joke one of the section. As the sun dips low, the rebellious swarm settles in a distant fig tree. They've chosen exile. Apollo mutters about naming it the colony of failed expectations. You suggest Plan B. Light joke 2. Night falls. Crickets hum. You both sit in companionable failure watching sparks of bee light drift lazily across the grove. There's something oddly comforting about it all, the god, the glory, and the utter faceplant of ambition. I thought they'd worship me, he murmurs. I mean, everything else does. You lean back on your elbows. Try giving them something worth worshipping. A long pause. Then with a grimace and a grunt, Apollo nods. Tomorrow, he promises. Tomorrow we do it right. A bee lands gently on his shoulder, and this time he lets it sit. You wake to the sharp sting of poetry, literally. One of the muses is reciting a limerick while trying to swat bees away from her hair. This wouldn't be so alarming if the bees weren't treating her curls like prime real estate. You rub your eyes and take in the scene. It looks like someone crossed a Greek amphitheater with a beekeeping conference run by first-timers on too much ambrosia. The muses have arrived. All 9 of them. Clio's narrating events in real-time, Calliope's composing a tragic ode to Apollo's swollen lip, and Eratos trying to flirt with a drone bee that doesn't seem to understand personal space. Apparently, Apollo summoned them last night in a fit of collaborative desperation. If his honey project wasn't going to be functional, then by Zeus, it would at least be artistic. Mainstream fact. In many ancient rituals, music and rhythm were believed to calm animals, especially livestock. Apollo's banking on that logic translating to bees. Problem is, these aren't cows. These are small airborne creatures powered by fury, loyalty, and pheromones. So when Calliope starts a verse in G major about the sweetness of eternal nectar, the bees interpret it as an act of war. A rising angry hum fills the grove, then chaos. Bees zip between harp strings. Melpomene's robe catches fire from a sunbeam bent too sharply by the golden hive. Polyhymnia tries interpretive dance to soothe the swarm, but accidentally flattens a wildflower patch sacred to local nymphs who appear instantly furious and barefoot. You duck as Thalia, muse of comedy, throws a lyre at a buzzing cloud. This is not funny, she screams. It's very funny, you reply, rolling behind a boulder as a dozen bees form a stinger phalanx. Meanwhile, Apollo stands in the center of it all, arms raised dramatically like he's conducting an opera no one rehearsed. My sisters, he cries. Channel your essence, harmonize with the hive. Instead, Urania is stuck in a tree. The situation escalates when Clio suggests using smoke and Euterpe counters with just try singing in a minor key. You pull out your humble olive oil gourd smoker and give it a puff too late. One of the muses accidentally steps on a royal jelly bowl, and the scent throws the entire swarm into confusion. Historians still argue whether this kind of ancient melodrama actually occurred during ritualistic bee-blessing ceremonies. Some scholars think priests sang to hives to symbolize spiritual harmony. Others believe the song of bees was just poetic metaphor, and after today you sincerely hope it was the latter. By midday, the grove is a battlefield of honey and broken lutes. You find Apollo under a bush attempting to write a hymn called "To Those Who Misunderstood My Genius." You hand him a canteen and sit beside him. We need to talk, you say gently, about maybe not involving a full choir next time. He groans. They were supposed to inspire serenity. You gesture toward the grove. Calliope's in a thistle patch screaming in iambic pentameter. Quirky tidbit: in the 18th century, European beekeepers used to tell the bees about family deaths and major events, believing it kept the hives stable. You consider leaning into that tradition and whispering, Apollo's credibility has passed on, just to see if it helps. Instead, you propose something radical. What if we go quiet? Apollo blinks. Quiet. No music, no speeches, no glowing scrolls, just stillness. Bees don't need theater. They need rhythm, scent, time. The concept clearly offends every fiber of his being. Silence from him, and yet he nods, just once. That evening, the grove transforms. No instruments, no choreography. The muses pack up and leave grumbling but slightly sticky and weirdly enlightened. You and Apollo rebuild the hive with fewer flourishes, more structure. He trades the amphitheater roof for a solid wooden lid. He even adds a proper landing board. It's not humble, but it's closer to functional. You prepare a new swarm box baited with crushed lemon balm and a sliver of beeswax. The air smells earthy, grounded. A few scouts arrive buzz lazily, and miracle of miracles stay. No fanfare, no poetry, just quiet. Apollo watches arms folded, jaw tight. Is this what success feels like, he murmurs? Less like applause, more like patience. He hums, I don't like it. But the bees do. Light joke 1. As the stars peek out, a dozen foragers slip into the hive. Apollo leans forward as if watching a candlelight ritual. They're organizing. They're bees. That's what they do. He watches a drone bump into the landing board, correct itself, and disappear into the comb. They don't even look at me. Exactly. Light joke 2. The wind settles. You hear the hive breathe soft clicks, quiet vibrations, like the first murmur of a symphony tuning up. But this time it's not directed by Apollo. It's directed by instinct, community, order without ego. And for the first time, the god doesn't interrupt it. He just sits and listens. You rise before dawn to find Apollo already perched beside the hive, sipping something golden from a glass shaped like a sunflower. He doesn't greet you, just lifts a finger for silence. You tiptoe over, half expecting a sermon, but he simply points. The bees are dancing. Not in the whimsical tutu-wearing way he probably envisioned back in Phase 1, but in the real coded movement of foragers. You watch one bee waggle in tight figure eights on the comb, then zip away. Another follows. A third joins in. It's quiet, focused, mechanical, beautiful. Looks like they found nectar, you whisper. Apollo nods slowly. From the lavender grove across the ridge. Based on angle and pace. Right. You blink. You read the waggle. He grins. I am the god of knowledge, remember? Mainstream historical fact. It was Austrian ethologist Karl von Frisch who cracked the bee dance code in the 20th century. He discovered that the angle and duration of the waggle indicate direction and distance to a nectar source. The fact that Apollo's just casually decoding this like it's the morning crossword is frankly unfair. But you'll allow it. Today he's earned it. The hive thrums with purpose. Bees ferry pollen in golden saddlebags, weaving tight aerial lanes. The grove itself has quieted in response. Olive leaves barely rustle, and even the cicadas seem to be on break. It feels sacred, not because of divine light or celestial fanfare, but because everything is finally working. Until Artemis shows up. You hear her before you see her, a cracking twig, the low snort of a deer, and then her voice cool and amused. So, this is what you've been doing with your week. She emerges from the tree-lined bough, over one shoulder, half a pheasant in the other hand, and a smug little grin that you just know is going to cause trouble. Apollo straightens. It's a project, a meditation in ecological balance. Artemis raises an eyebrow. Looks like an insect daycare with delusions of grandeur. He bristles. They're more organized than half your hunting parties. Oh, I let mine choose their own path. They walk in circles. Exactly, free range. Light joke 1. She tosses the pheasant onto a nearby stump and leans in to peer at the hive. Is that Laurelwood, Apollo, you drama muffin? They chew through cedar. He flushes. It's reinforced, and it's beautiful. Is it ventilated? A pause. Is it bear-proof? Longer pause. You quietly edge behind a rock. Apollo changes the subject. They're responding well. I've adjusted my aura to a frequency of cooperative energy. Artemis snorts. You tried to seduce them with sunlight and got stung in the soul. Light joke 2. Still, she crouches beside the hive, surprisingly gentle. A forager buzzes past her cheek and she doesn't flinch. You should plant thyme near the base. Keeps the mites off. Apollo stares at her. What she says, I read. You almost offer her your seat. Quirky tidbit. In the highlands of ancient Anatolia, beekeepers used thyme smoke to ward off hive infections. Some even brewed mad honey with local rhododendrons, hallucinogenic, dangerous, and beloved by reckless warriors. Apollo doesn't need more of that energy, but you file it away. The twins sit in silence, watching the rhythm of the hive. For a moment they aren't gods. Just siblings in the shade, each pretending not to admire the other. Then Artemis spots something. A cluster of drones is loitering near the upper comb, forming a writhing ball. She nudges Apollo. Are they fighting? He leans in. They're vying for queen access. She whistles. Brutal. You sure you've got the hierarchy sorted? Soon, he says. The workers are selecting a new queen. Historians still argue whether ancient beekeepers fully understood queen succession or simply believed it was divine intervention. One fragment from a Mycenaean tablet suggests that priestesses identified the queen by her golden stillness. Another claims it was just whichever bee outlasted the others in the wrestling match. You and Apollo are about to witness that match. The hum intensifies. The drones bristle. A single larger bee emerges, a fresh queen pulsing with pheromonal gravitas. The others immediately lunge. It's quick, brutal, slightly terrifying. And then quiet. The new queen mounts the central comb. The hive shifts. Everything realigns, like the entire colony has exhaled. Apollo whispers, "Is this democracy?" Artemis chuckles. "This is monarchy with knives." Light joke 3. By dusk, the hive is stable. The new queen is laying. The foragers are fanning the brood chamber. You light the smoker one last time, not for chaos control, but to calm a particularly cranky scout. Even Artemis looks impressed. "Not bad," she says, stretching. "Still ridiculous, but not bad." Apollo nods solemnly. Their discipline is impressive. You glance at the lyre still lying under a tree, half stung and slightly wilted. No music. He smiles faintly. Maybe tomorrow. The stars blink on. The grove cools. You hear only wings leaves and the soft, steady rhythm of life, and somewhere under it all the faintest hum of understanding. Morning arrives with a scent so sweet it could cause dental decay in the gods. The hive is humming like a well-oiled chorus, precise, orderly, and faintly smug. Apollo, wearing gloves made of moonlight and a new headband that says "Be Positive" in gold embroidery, light joke 1, is preparing his grand experiment in nectar enrichment. Because of course things were going too well. You watch from a safe distance as he approaches the hive with a chalice of glowing liquid. "Ambrosia," he announces, cut with a splash of spring dew. It will elevate their product. You step in front of the entrance like a human gatekeeper. You want to feed the bees ambrosia. "Just a drop," he says, eyes gleaming. "Imagine the honey, the flavor, the poetry." You fold your arms. You're going to create bees that see time sideways. Apollo waves you off and tilts the chalice. One shimmering drop lands on the outer comb, and that's all it takes. The effect is immediate. The bees don't buzz. They vibrate like golden tuning forks. Several begin moving in what can only be described as interpretive dance. One flies directly into Apollo's face, kisses his forehead, and disappears into the clouds. A soft pop echoes from inside the hive. A second later, 3 drones stumble out, weaving in slow spirals, their legs coated in what looks like glittering peach jam. One of them tries to sting a daisy and misses. "Too much," Apollo asks weakly. You sigh. You've given them a sugar high, a divine sugar high. Mainstream historical fact. The process of feeding bees sugar syrup, called supplemental feeding, is common in off-seasons or during poor nectar flow. But it has limits. Overfeed, and you confuse the hive's priorities. Over-medicate, and you throw off their biology. Overdo it with immortal nectar and, well, this. You crouch near the hive entrance and watch as 2 foragers try to do the waggle dance upside down. Another smears honey on the outer comb and writes chai in sticky letters. You don't have the heart to tell Apollo they've invented graffiti. "Okay," he admits. "Maybe divine infusion was a bit much." "A bit. I only meant to inspire them. You made them high." Light joke 2. The queen herself emerges looking slightly irritated and extremely well-fed. She's surrounded by attendants who appear to be fanning her with their wings in slow motion as if caught in a dream sequence. You watch as she performs what might be a very regal shrug. "You've disrupted their cycle," you say. "I've enhanced their experience. You've invented honey rave culture." Light joke 3. The hive is overflowing. Literally. Golden syrup seeps down the wooden walls like molten sunlight. A few overzealous workers begin storing it in cracks and tree bark. One builds a miniature amphora. Another fashions a comb in the shape of a heart. It's impressive. And slightly alarming. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval monasteries believed that honey collected during the Feast of the Assumption had healing properties, and should never be mixed with honey from mundane days. Apollo seems to be channeling that idea on a cosmic scale. By late afternoon, the bees begin to crash. Energy plummets. Drones slump mid-air and drift gently to the ground, snoring. Workers fall asleep mid-comb. One lands on your sandal and drools. The entire hive is pulsing with what can only be described as a food coma. Apollo sighs. It was beautiful while it lasted. Yeah, like a fireworks show made of sugar and regret. He pulls out a scroll and begins furiously noting bee behaviors. Increased creativity, temporary aggression, reduced navigational skills, vocalization in C-sharp. Wait, they were singing. He looks up. You didn't hear that? You sit back watching the hive settle like a sleepy city after a festival. A few bees groggily resume fanning the queen. A drone crawls to the edge and flips onto its back in a gesture of sheer existential surrender. You and Apollo begin cleanup. Together you build a barrier to collect the runoff, honey thick golden and fizzing faintly with ambrosial energy. You bottle some, sealing it with wax and a warning label: do not consume before bed while operating chariots, or if mortal. By evening the hive returns to normal more or less. The workers reorient, the queen lays, the graffiti fades. Apollo watches the horizon, rubbing his temples. I wanted them to taste divinity, he murmurs. And they did, you say? Then they forgot how to fly in a straight line. He exhales. I keep trying to make them better. But maybe they were fine from the start. Bingo! You sit in silence for a while, listening to the low hum of the hive, a kind of apology, a return to instinct. A reminder that simplicity often outlasts brilliance. Apollo finally smiles just a little. No more ambrosia. Promise. Promise. You extend a pinky. He takes it. The moon climbs over the grove, and for the first time in days there is no chaos. No music. Just bees doing what bees do in a hive that is at last just a hive. The next day dawns humid and electric, the air thick with pollen and potential. You find Apollo deep in thought, chin resting on one hand, the other sketching something in the dust with a stick. You squint down, it's a flowchart titled Bee Diplomacy Phase 1. At the center is a crudely drawn flower and a confused-looking bee labeled Kevin. You cough gently. Apollo glances up. I'm organizing a peace summit. You stare at him. Between what exactly? The hives, he says, as if that were obvious. Diplomatic relations. Maybe a charter. Symbolic olive leaf exchange. A mutually agreed upon nectar zone. You blink. You're trying to get bees to sign a treaty. He nods. I've even prepared seating arrangements. Drones on the right, workers on the left. Queen representatives elevated naturally. Mainstream fact. Honeybee colonies are highly territorial. Worker bees will defend their hive against invaders, even other bees of the same species, using scent cues and a finely tuned social code. They don't do diplomacy. They do security checks at the entrance and occasionally full-on turf wars. You explain this to Apollo as kindly as possible. He frowns. That's disappointing. I had a schedule for interpretive dances and everything. Nevertheless, he's determined. He's identified 2 wild hives nearby, one in a myrtle tree, the other in a cave wall. He calls them Hive Athena and Hive Dionysus because he can't help himself. You volunteer to visit Hive Athena, thinking maybe a few scouts could be lured to a neutral location. So you prepare a small baiting station, a flat slab of stone smeared with lavender and crushed mint. Apollo adds a wax seal featuring a handshake between bees. You don't tell him it looks like 2 spiders fist bumping. You wait, and then they arrive. First Hive Athena, 7 scouts, efficient, no-nonsense types. They land, inspect the bait, do a brief waggle to each other, then depart with military precision. Next Hive Dionysus. 13 bees arrive all at once, circling wildly, bumping into one another and immediately trying to dig through the slab as if it were made of nectar sponge cake. One tries to sting a shadow. Another starts grooming your thumbnail. You glance at Apollo. This is going well. He beams. They're mingling. Then a Dionysian bee smacks into an Athenian bee mid-flight. A pause. A scuffle. And then it's on. The air fills with wings and rage. The scent of crushed pollen and wax rises like smoke. Bees tumble and twist, antennae flaring, stingers twitching. You duck as a tiny golden missile whizzes past your ear. Historians still argue whether the fabled bee wars mentioned in rare Babylonian inscriptions were metaphorical, mythic, or just creative descriptions of hive competition during drought. Watching this skirmish, you suspect the Babylonians weren't exaggerating. Apollo is devastated. I wanted harmony, he wails. Unity, a shared nectar economy. You gently pull him behind a rock. You've created a bee riot. Light joke 1. Once the buzzing dies down, the 2 factions retreat, leaving a battlefield of scattered wings and upturned petals. One bee from Hive Dionysus lands on Apollo's head, does a disoriented dance, and promptly falls asleep. The others vanish back to their respective territories. Apollo mutters, they don't appreciate structure. They don't want structure, you say. They are the structure. He scowls. So what now, abandon diplomacy? You shrug. Maybe try respecting the borders. He sighs. And here I thought I was the god of balance. You are, just not in hives. Light joke 2. Quirky tidbit in parts of ancient Crete. Some hives were kept separate not just by distance but by the planting of strong scented herbs, basil, anise, and rue, as a kind of aromatic do-not-cross line. You suggest Apollo try that instead of summits. By late afternoon you help him plant small herb rings around each hive. Thyme and mint for the wild ones, marjoram and lemon balm for his. It's a start. Later the bees seem calmer. Scouts flit between flowers without incident. No duels. No standoffs. Just buzzing. Focused. Intent. Apollo sits beside you, legs stretched out, robe stained with soil and pollen. He gazes up at the sky. I thought I could change them. You smile. They changed you instead. He blinks. That feels suspiciously profound. Or maybe it's just heat stroke. Light joke 3. The wind picks up gently. Leaves rustle. A few bees land on your arm, peaceful now, their mission complete for the day. You exhale, letting the hum lull your thoughts into stillness. Apollo stands dusting off his hands. Fine. No more summits. No more treaties. Then he looks over his shoulder and adds, "But I'm still writing the anthem." You groan. That evening, Apollo disappears for 3 hours and returns wearing what can only be described as ceremonial beekeeping armor. It's gilded. It sparkles. There's a flowing cape made of woven thistle silk. Across his chest, a large embroidered bee holding a lyre. He says, "We're naming the queen." You stare. You're what now? She deserves a title, he explains, hands on hips, utterly unaware of the wind catching his cape and nearly flinging him into a fig tree. She rules, she births, she builds. It's time she had a name. You open your mouth to argue, then close it again. Frankly, it could be worse. Compared to the Ambrosia incident or the bee treaty debacle, a little ceremonial overkill might even be, dare you say, harmless. Mainstream fact. In ancient traditions, naming the queen wasn't exactly common practice, but she was often revered as a symbol of divine order. Egyptian mythology associated bees with the tears of Ra and queens, were seen as conduits of divine fertility. The ancient Greeks called sacred bee goddesses Melissae. So naming this one, surprisingly on theme. You both approach the hive with care. The colony is stable, the workers calm, and the queen is laying with clockwork precision. She moves across the comb like a conductor over sheet music, purposeful, quiet, precise. You're actually a little in awe. Apollo kneels beside the hive. I dub her Melodia the Golden. The bees do not object. One buzzes approvingly over his head, and then lands on your sleeve. You whisper, "Could have gone with Queenie McBuzzface." Light joke 1, but Apollo's surprisingly sincere. He places a single laurel leaf near the entrance, a gesture of respect, and hums a soft note, just one, in perfect pitch. No swarm, no dance riot. Just silence. The hive accepts. Quirky tidbit. There's a medieval belief that if you spoke respectfully to your bees, especially the queen, they would remain loyal, productive, even protective. Some farmers would whisper family news to their hives. You watch Apollo now murmuring softly in ancient Doric and wonder if the myth wasn't far off. The bees are listening. Or maybe he's listening. Either way, something in the air shifts. But of course, it wouldn't be Apollo if he didn't overdo it. The next day, you catch him drafting a lineage scroll. He's sketched Melodia's face, 6 eyes, majestic mandibles, a little crown, and beneath it a branching genealogy of hypothetical royal descendants with names like Bumblethina and Apis the Wise. You raise an eyebrow. Future generations will need context, he says. They're bees. They're royalty. Light joke 2. Later, you find him carving a tiny throne out of olive wood. Not for the queen, of course, just symbolic. It has honeycomb inlays, a velvet cushion dyed from crushed crocus petals, and a tiny inscription that reads, "Regina apium by the will of nectar." You consider staging an intervention, but the bees actually seem charmed. A few workers even polish the edges with their mandibles. Somewhere deep down, you know this means Apollo is bonding, not commanding, not directing, just appreciating. You sit beside him as he gently holds a frame, tilting it toward the sun. "Do you see this?" he murmurs. They're building toward her. Every line, every chamber. They orbit her. You nod. That's how the hive holds. He stares at the comb a moment longer, then whispers, "I get it now. Why humans worship structure. It's not about order. It's about continuity." Historians still debate whether ancient temples modeled their inner sanctums on hives, small sacred chambers lined in gold, pulsing with quiet intention. Some scholars argue the similarities are coincidence. Others think bees shaped theology as much as agriculture. You suspect both might be true. Apollo leans back, arms crossed behind his head. She doesn't sing, but they answer her. Isn't that strange? You smile. Maybe silence is the loudest kind of power. Light joke 3. The grove glows in late afternoon warmth. Bees return from their foraging routes, landing gently on the new cedar landing board Apollo installed after the incident. They move with purpose, wings gently fanning. The rhythm is undeniable now, practical, sacred, and strangely soothing. You help Apollo install a simple feeder tray, just sugar water, no flair. He doesn't even sprinkle saffron. You're proud. Later, you find the miniature throne placed just outside the hive. It's not in the way, just there, like a tiny shrine to everything they've built, everything they've endured, and the new understanding humming between divine and insect. Apollo watches it for a long time. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. The grove is nearly silent when you arrive the next morning. No musical misfires, no poetic recitations, no pollen-covered chaos. Just that low, rich hum like a cat purring through a megaphone wrapped in honey. Apollo's sitting cross-legged near the hive, eyes closed, breathing in time with the rhythm of the bees. You almost don't want to interrupt. But then he opens one eye and says, "I've decided to enter the honey into competition." You blink. What competition? "The Great Pan-Hellenic Honey Festival," he replies, as if it were as obvious as gravity. "Starts next week. Corinth. Judged by nymphs. Very prestigious." You rub your temples. "Apollo, that's probably not a thing." "It is now," he says, and pulls out a flyer. Mainstream fact. While there was no official Pan-Hellenic honey contest in the ancient world, many city-states prized their regional honeys. Attic-time honey, for example, was a well-known delicacy. Ceremonial offerings often included honey cakes and jars of honey placed in temples. So the idea of judging honey, not as far-fetched as you'd think. But Apollo doesn't just want to submit honey. He wants to make a statement, a presentation. There's talk of marble pedestals, coordinated bee choreography, and a tasting booth featuring tiny lyre-shaped crackers. You sigh deeply. You're turning a bee product into a one-man show. He beams, as the gods intended. That afternoon, you help him harvest a few frames. The process is surprisingly calm. The bees don't swarm, no stings, no angry buzzing. You smoke the hive gently, just enough to mask the alarm pheromones. Melodia continues laying with serene indifference, as if regal detachment were part of the job description. The honey glorious. Golden. Slightly floral with a hint of wild thyme and citrus. You dip a finger in and taste. It's like late summer melted on your tongue. Apollo tastes it, pauses, then says, "This is art." You roll your eyes. This is food. Food is art. Quirky tidbit. The philosopher Aristotle studied bees extensively, and once wrote that honey was the moisture distilled from the stars and the rainbow. Which is absurd, of course, but also kind of perfect, because Apollo absolutely believes that. The next step is bottling. Apollo unveils his custom containers, amphorae no larger than a plum, etched with sunburst motifs, and sealed with beeswax. Each comes with a tiny scroll containing a haiku about light and labor. You stare at one labeled Golden Chorus Batch Number 2 and say, "You've made the world's first artisanal honey branding kit." He doesn't even deny it. But what's more impressive is how he handles the bees now. No grand gestures, no serenades. He moves with careful intention, always mindful of their space. He even bows slightly when passing the queen's chamber, not because it's required, but because it feels right. That night, while you're sealing jars by candlelight, Apollo turns serious. "Do you think they like me?" You look up. "The bees." He nods. "They don't speak, but I feel them, their rhythm, their focus. It's not worship, but it's something close." You set down a jar. They trust you. That's more important. Historians still argue whether early depictions of bee-human relationships were literal or spiritual. In some Mesopotamian texts, beekeeping was considered a priestly duty, a kind of sacred stewardship. Watching Apollo, now smeared in wax, quietly labeling jars by hand, you begin to understand why. He asks, "Do you think I'll win?" You shrug. "You already did." Light joke 1. He grins. "You're just saying that." "No, I mean it. You built something. You learned." You stop monologuing mid-smoke. "Small miracles," he mutters. "Next you'll be composting." He shudders. "Let's not go too far." Light joke 2. The night deepens. The hive pulses gently in the dark, a golden heart wrapped in wings. You and Apollo sit beside it, your stack of labeled amphorae glowing faintly in the moonlight. Then he says it. "I'm not entering the competition." You pause. "What, why not?" He leans back, gazing up through the olive branches. "Because it's not for them. It's for her. For Melodia. And her city of wings." You watch his face soften and realize he's not joking. Not this time. "She's not a prize," he continues. "She's a sovereign. And I was just lucky enough to be her scribe." Quirky tidbit again. In ancient Delphi, priestesses known as the Delphic bees served the oracle, translating divine messages into riddles. Some believed the bees themselves whispered secrets from the gods. Tonight, you swear the hive hums with something wiser than words. Apollo places one amphora before the entrance, not to offer, not to take, just to honor. And the bees, they let it be. You wake the next morning to a low, unfamiliar hum lower than usual, heavier. A vibration that rattles the olives in their branches. You sit up, stretch, and immediately sense something is off. The bees are restless. The grove's usual quiet is laced with tension. Foragers spiral erratically. Guard bees cluster near the hive entrance, in tight formation, their wings held stiff. Apollo's already at the hive, crouching low, his expression unreadable. Something's wrong, he murmurs before you can ask. They're too quiet. You listen. He's right. The hum has lost its rhythm now, it's just noise. Mainstream historical fact. A change in a hive's hum can signal distress. Experienced beekeepers often recognize swarming disease or queen death, not by sight but by sound. You scan the hive entrance. No signs of predators. No weather damage. But then you spotted a subtle shift in pattern. The queen's attendants are moving slower. A few have begun trembling, not dancing. You pop open the observation panel, and the queen is gone. Melodia is missing. You and Apollo both freeze. It's hard to overstate how much this matters. A hive without its queen is a nation without a ruler, a song without a beat. The colony becomes directionless. The workers fall into disarray. Some try to rear a new queen. Others turn on each other. Some simply stop working. I don't understand, Apollo says. She was fine last night, laying regularly, surrounded. He leans in, searching for clues, chewed wax, empty brood cells, an unattended queen cell. Then he sees it, a faint trail of wax dust near the back panel. A narrow gap. A crack in the hive wall. She didn't die, you murmur. She left. Historians still argue whether ancient myths about vanished queens, like the Sumerian goddess Inanna's descent into the underworld, were metaphors for natural events like colony collapse or queen departure. You're starting to think they weren't metaphors at all. Apollo stands slowly. She absconded. You nod. And took part of the colony with her. Quirky tidbit. When a queen decides to leave, she can trigger what's called absconding, a rare event, where nearly the entire hive abandons the structure. Not due to swarming for reproduction, but because they no longer feel safe. Stress. Disturbance. Overexposure to divine energy, perhaps. You and Apollo sit in stunned silence. He finally whispers, "She left me. She made a choice. I named her. I built her a throne." You sigh, and sometimes a throne is a cage. Light joke 1. The bees that remain are agitated, flying short, uncertain loops. A few scout cells show signs of emergency, queen rearing tiny cups shaped like teardrops waiting to be filled with royal jelly. The hive is trying to recover, but Apollo is still staring at the empty chamber. I gave her everything, he says quietly. You gently tap the side of the hive. No, you didn't. You gave her you. What she needed was space. He winces. I always do this. You raise an eyebrow. Overmanage. Overlove. You pat his shoulder. Same thing sometimes. Light joke 2. He sits back, head against the olive trunk. The wind picks up. A few bees land on his boots, twitching their antennae, confused. You can almost feel them asking, now what? And honestly, you're wondering the same. Then Apollo says, we start again. You blink. You're not going after her. He shakes his head. Queens don't return. They move forward. So must we. It's a small thing, a sentence. But you hear the shift in his voice, less grandeur, more humility. You help him stabilize the hive, seal the gap, add a pollen patty, support the brood comb. The colony is smaller now, but still alive, still buzzing. Then he does something that surprises you. He doesn't name the new queen. Instead, he calls her whoever rises. You glance at him. He says, it's not about me. Light joke 3. The sun sets. The hive quiets. Somewhere in the dark, Melodia flies through unfamiliar trees, her loyal bees trailing behind like silent satellites. You wonder where she's nesting now. If she still wears the scent of laurel. If she remembers the gilded hive and the god who couldn't help but adore her. Apollo watches the stars emerge. Maybe she wanted wilderness, he says. You nod. Maybe she was wilderness. That night you both fall asleep beside the hive, not to guard it, not to claim it, but to listen, to wait, to begin again. Because that's what bees do. The grove wakes slower now, a softer rhythm. The bees aren't frantic, they're cautious. They move like a city after an earthquake, testing the ground, checking the skyline. You and Apollo sit quietly near the hive, watching this hesitant rebuilding unfold. Requeening, you say, is a messy process. He nods, still bleary-eyed, robe, wrinkled hair, sticking out like the aftershock of heartbreak. I keep expecting her to return, like she forgot her crown. You shake your head. She didn't forget. She outgrew it. Mainstream historical fact. When a queen leaves and a new one is raised, the hive goes through a delicate, perilous window. The workers nurture several larvae, feeding them royal jelly. But only one survives. Sometimes queens hatch and fight. Sometimes the firstborn slaughters the rest before they even emerge. It's ruthless. It's necessary. It's happening now. You peer into the observation slot. One queen cell has been chewed open. Another sits untouched, trembling faintly. She's in there, Apollo whispers, waiting. He's right. Somewhere in that dark cradle of wax, the future is sharpening its mandibles. You both sit in reverent silence for a long time. Then suddenly a cracking sound. A rip in the cocoon wall. A small, glistening body crawls out, shiny, pale, still wet. She wobbles, stretches her legs, and lets out a low vibration, almost imperceptible, like a tuning fork waking up. She is small, uncertain, and deadly. She's got to find her sisters, you say, or rivals. Apollo leans forward. Do we help? You shake your head. Not our story. Historians still argue whether ancient myths of twin goddesses fighting in womb-like chambers, Artemis and her shadow Hera and her golden twin, were inspired by bees. The brutality, the inheritance of power. You're starting to see the parallel. Apollo rises slowly. He's not dressed in gold today. No cape. Just simple linen. No ceremonial tools, no wax-stamped scrolls. For once he doesn't try to name the moment. He just watches. I don't know if she'll survive, he says. No queen ever knows, you reply. Quirky tidbit. In certain West African traditions, newly crowned queens of matrilineal tribes were tested not by combat but by tending a hive. If the bees accepted her touch, she ruled. If they stung her, well, succession was reconsidered. You wonder if your queen will be accepted, or if she'll fight, or flee. Later that day you hear it. Not loud, not proud, just steady. A new hum. The hive vibrates at a slightly different pitch, now higher, thinner, not as deep as when Melodia ruled, but insistent, determined. The workers are fanning the brood chamber again. Foragers begin to leave tentatively at first. The drones huddle confused, waiting for orders. She's moving, you whisper, taking her place. Apollo doesn't respond. He's staring at the entrance like it's the start of a long poem he hasn't written yet. And then he smiles. She's different. Good, you say. She's supposed to be. Light joke one. He squints at the tiny procession forming near the center comb workers, touching antennae to the new queen, offering her a bit of nectar, adjusting to her scent. The colony is realigning, rewriting itself around this fragile, newly born command. I think I'll call her. No, you interrupt. He chuckles. Right, too soon. Light joke two. By sunset, the hive's tempo has changed. Not chaotic, just unfamiliar. The guards are stricter now. One bee actually headbutts Apollo's finger when he gets too close. You both take that as a sign to back off. She's claiming her space. She's going to be fierce, Apollo says. You nod. Probably not a throne builder. No, he says, more of a wanderer. The irony is not lost on either of you. You set out a small tray of sugar water just in case, but the foragers ignore it. They're working again, and they don't need pity snacks. You watch them vanish into the orange blossoms and wild thyme, navigating by angles and instinct. Light joke 3. The new queen vanishes into the deeper chamber. Her attendants follow. The entrance grows still, only the sound of wind and the faint crackle of pine branches overhead. She's not Melodia, Apollo says softly. No, you agree, she's herself. And maybe that's the whole point. Not to replicate the past, not to preserve perfection, but to let things change. To trust the hive to decide what it needs and when. The night stretches out around the grove, wide and uncertain, but alive. The new queen has survived her first week. She doesn't sing. She doesn't strut. She doesn't even seem interested in Apollo, which is perhaps her greatest act of wisdom so far. You find her pacing the inner chamber like a general reviewing her troops, efficient, lean, with none of the pomp of Melodia. The workers have taken to her rhythm, and the hum of the hive has shifted again, snappier, more deliberate. Less golden lullaby, more business casual buzz. Apollo watches her from a respectful distance. No liars, no speeches, just quiet awe. She doesn't want a name, he says. You nod. Some rulers don't need one, they just rule. Mainstream historical fact. Most queens, unless marked by a keeper for tracking purposes, are anonymous to us. But in the hive, she is unmistakable. Her scent, the queen's pheromone, is what keeps the workers aligned, the drones docile, and the colony intact. It's an invisible command center, a perfume throne. This queen, let's call her the unnamed for now, is already laying eggs like a machine. The brood pattern is tight, nearly perfect. The workers are raising her comb with more precision than you've seen in weeks. Apollo's eyes go a little misty when he notices that the foragers have rebuilt the honey arch above her chamber without his help. They're honoring her, he says. No, you correct gently, they're working, because they can again. He laughs softly. Right, it's not worship, it's function. Quirky tidbit. In certain early Roman texts, bees were described as the ultimate citizens, selfless, diligent, obedient to a single leader, yet possessing no need for applause. Cicero called them the model of a republic. You're not sure Cicero ever met a drone during mating season, but you take the point. One afternoon you catch Apollo whispering something to the hive entrance. What was that, you ask? Just telling her I approve. You squint. Did you just endorse a queen like it's a startup? He grins. I'm pivoting to silent investment. Light joke 1. Despite the progress, there's still tension in the hive. Drones cluster near the upper comb, idle and redundant. Some have grown aggressive, bumping workers mid-flight. It's nearing autumn and you know what's coming. Apollo doesn't, until it starts. The purge. One by one, the workers begin dragging drones from the hive, pushing them, lifting them, wrestling them out the entrance like burly bouncers at a divine nightclub. Apollo gasps. What are they doing? Ejecting dead weight, you say. Winter's coming. No free rides. Light joke 2. Mainstream fact. This behavior, called the drone purge, happens in most hives once mating season ends. Drones consume resources but don't contribute. So the workers, efficient to a fault, expel them. No malice. Just math. Apollo watches horrified. But they're her sons. Only technically, you say. She doesn't raise them. She just lays them. He shudders, brutal. You shrug. Welcome to matriarchy. You help reinforce the hive entrance for winter, narrower now to protect from chill and wasps. Apollo lays crushed bay leaves near the base to deter ants. He's learned at last to be useful without being Apollo. You catch him reading a beekeeping tablet from Hittite clay archives. He underlines a section and whispers, they used crushed myrtle for nosema prevention. Why didn't I think of that? Because last week you were writing honey-themed epic poetry. Fair. Light joke 3. The new queen, the unnamed, continues to rule. Her egg-laying is relentless. The workers feed her constantly, never more than a few antennae away. You notice she prefers tight spaces, darker combs. She doesn't like the outer wall. She's not Melodia, Apollo says again. No, you agree. She's better suited to now. He leans back against a laurel tree. You know, I thought beekeeping would be cleaner. You snort. You wanted a sunlit palace. You got a battlefield. He smiles, and still I love it. The hive is smaller, now leaner, but it's strong. The new queen has focused the workers. The combs gleam again with stored nectar. Even the guard bees seem content. You both sit quietly listening. And in that quiet, there's something deeper than music, a rhythm not made by strings or voice, but by wings and wax and willpower. Apollo whispers, do you think she dreams? You smile, probably of flowers that haven't bloomed yet. And for once, he doesn't try to turn that into a poem. He just watches the hive. Not like a god, like a keeper. Winter settles over the grove like a soft gray blanket. The bees cluster tight inside the hive, a warm ball of buzzing life against the chill. You and Apollo watch from your seats beneath the olive trees, wrapped in wool and shared silence. The air smells of damp earth and drying time. The hive's activity slows, but inside the combs, the new queen, the unnamed, remains steady. Her egg-laying has paused as expected, but her presence is palpable. The workers cling close, feeding her with gentle care. The hive is alive, but it feels smaller, quieter, more deliberate. Apollo sighs. It's peaceful. You nod. The rhythm of rest. Mainstream historical fact. Honeybee colonies survive winter by clustering together, maintaining warmth through collective movement, and vibrating their flight muscles. They live off stored honey and pollen, conserving energy for the spring bloom. It's a delicate balance between survival and renewal. The contrast with earlier chaos is stark. You recall the wild ambrosia episode, the hive dancing like madmen, the treaty debacle with angry skirmishes in the lavender, the exuberant reign of Melodia the Golden, her throne and ceremonies. This is different. This is quiet endurance. Quirky tidbit. In ancient Celtic traditions, bees were considered keepers of the otherworld, messengers between realms. Their winter silence was seen as a sacred pause, a time when the veil between worlds thinned and spirits whispered on the wind. You glance at the hive, wondering if it hums with secrets you can't hear. Apollo stares into the dim hive entrance. I miss the golden days, he says softly. You smile gently. You miss the fireworks. But this is the song that lasts. He nods, eyes distant. You both watch as a single bee ventures out into the gray dawn, scouting for any sign of spring. It circles the olive branches, cautious and hopeful, before returning to the warmth. Do you think the hive remembers her? Apollo asks. The unnamed. He nods. Maybe she's the memory now, you say. Not a name, but a presence. A pulse. Apollo leans back, eyes closed. I wanted control, to guide them, to perfect them. And you learned to follow. He opens one eye. Not a bad lesson. You laugh quietly. Not bad at all. Light joke 1. Suddenly, a soft wind stirs, carrying the faintest scent of blossoms. You both inhale deeply. Spring is coming, you say. Apollo smiles. So is the next adventure. Light joke 2. You pack up your things slowly. Before you go, Apollo kneels and places a small laurel wreath near the hive entrance, a quiet tribute to what was lost and what endures. Here's to the hive, he whispers. And to the keepers, you add. The grove fades behind you, the bees humming softly, a lullaby for those who listen. Light joke 3. The night waits. Tomorrow waits. And with it, the promise of new wings and new songs. Spring arrives with a sudden burst of color and sound. You wake to the hum of the hive swelling like a choir warming up before the grand performance. The olive trees bloom with fresh leaves, the wild thyme carpets the ground in pale purple, and the air tastes sweet with nectar. The unnamed queen is back in full motion. You watch her lay egg after egg, surrounded by a throng of attentive workers who buzz like a symphony orchestra. The hive is vibrant again, alive, purposeful, and fiercely determined. Apollo stands nearby, arms crossed, watching her with a quiet reverence. Gone is the gilded armor and ceremonial flair. Instead, there's a softness in his gaze, a humility earned through trials and failures. See, you say the hive's found its balance. He nods. She's not Melodia, but she's perfect. Mainstream historical fact. Bees often replace their queens every 1 to 2 years in natural cycles, a process known as supersedure, which ensures colony vitality and adaptability. The new queen doesn't just replace the old. She renews the entire colony's energy. You notice a small group of drones buzzing lazily near the hive entrance. This time, the workers tolerate their presence in acknowledgement of the coming mating season. Apollo watches them with a mix of fascination and disbelief. They're kind of useless, aren't they? You grin. Essentially male freeloaders. Light joke 1. The hive's dance language is in full swing now. You catch a worker performing a waggle dance, an intricate figure 8, communicating the location of a nearby orange grove. You smile, imagining Apollo trying to choreograph that. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient poets believed bees' dances were secret messages from the gods, divine instructions hidden in the rhythm and angle of their flight. Whether that's true or not, it's certainly beautiful. The hive is thriving, but you and Apollo know winter is still months away. For now, the light is long and the nectar is plenty. Apollo kneels beside the hive, a rare softness in his voice. Thank you. For what you ask. For teaching me patience. You chuckle. You're welcome. Light joke 2. As the sun sets, you both sit under the fig tree, watching bees return laden with golden pollen. The hum is constant, a gentle reminder that life moves in cycles, fragile yet unstoppable. Apollo sighs. I still don't get beekeeping, but I'm starting to get bees. That's progress. He smiles. Maybe next time I'll leave the throne at home. You laugh softly. One can hope. Light joke 3. The grove glows in the fading light, the bees' song weaving into the twilight, a lullaby of endings and beginnings. The grove feels different now, not because the bees have changed, but because you and Apollo have. The seasons have turned like pages in an ancient book, each chapter filled with stings, songs, losses, and lessons. You sit side by side, watching the hive pulse with life, its hum a steady heartbeat beneath the olive branches. Apollo turns to you, eyes soft with something like peace. I thought I was the god of control. You smile. Turns out you're the god of learning. He chuckles. Or the god of honey and humility. The hive is thriving stronger for its trials. The unnamed queen lays with steady purpose. The workers move with quiet confidence. The autumn chill is just a whisper away, but for now the air is warm, scented with time and promise. Mainstream historical fact. Beekeeping in ancient Greece was as much an art as a science. Hives were seen as sacred spaces, and the keeper's relationship with the colony was one of respect and patience, not domination. Apollo's journey mirrors that wisdom. You glance around the grove, noticing the small details: the worn hive frame patched with bits of wax, the faint scent of crushed mint where Apollo planted his herbal border, the tiny laurel wreath still resting near the entrance. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient tales speak of bees as messengers between worlds, carrying prayers and dreams on their wings. Perhaps that's why their hum feels so eternal, so full of mystery. Apollo leans back, eyes closed. I never thought I'd learn so much from bees. Sometimes the smallest teachers are the most profound. Light joke 1. He laughs softly. Next time I'll stick to liars and light. You grin. And maybe leave the throne at home. Light joke 2. The grove settles into twilight. The bees slow their dance, clustering into a golden orb of warmth and life. You feel the soft hum vibrate through the earth, a quiet song of resilience and renewal. As you prepare to leave, Apollo's voice is barely more than a whisper. Thank you for being here. You smile. Thank you for letting me watch. Light joke 3. The night wraps around you, calm and endless. The bees rest, the olive trees breathe, and the world waits. And somewhere just beyond the stars, the hive dreams. The grove fades gently into night, the last light slipping through olive leaves like a slow sigh. You feel the quiet settling deep into your bones, the soft, steady pulse of life continuing beyond your watch. The bees rest, tucked beneath wax and warmth, their world reduced to the glow of a single flame in the dark. You breathe in the stillness, letting the hum of the hive lull you into calm. There is no hurry here, no rush, only the patient promise of dawn. As your eyelids grow heavy, you carry with you the strange, sweet knowledge that sometimes the gods don't command. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they learn. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.